a very nice lady with a very nice Irish accent rings me to ask me about how I'm finding Instagram and talking to me about my content. And she basically reviewed my content. And she basically pointed out I could be doing better by posting more. To which I responded, well, on TikTok and on YouTube, I actually get revenue share for making all of this content. Why should I make more content when you're not paying me to do it? And she really quickly, almost as if it were a practiced line, she said, look at Instagram as your business card.
Do it for the exposure.
Do it for the exposure. Yes, that's the translation of what she said. Mad.
Hi, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
So this week we have Sophia Smith Galer on the podcast, who we met in Dubai when we went to the 1 billion followers summit. And I know you were really intrigued by her background as a BBC journalist, someone who's fascinated by language and has created apps. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Sophia's background and what made you want to talk to her today?
She is the sort of an example of the new social media driven public intellectual. She's written books. She's a journalist. She's studied language itself. And her work is super fascinating because it comes from the perspective of being a traditionally trained journalist who has moved over to making social media and building a large social media following. And she talks about the intersection between traditional journalism and social media journalism and understanding how to work the algorithms, understanding how to build an audience. And she talks about her app, Sophiana, which is a tool for journalists to understand how to make this media. And we get into the role of language on social media and the way in which communities of people are also working to protect endangered languages.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting to hear her talk about how being an independent, I don't know, newsfluencer is a word that keeps coming up. I don't know if that's how she would describe herself, but has really enabled her to delve more deeply into all sorts of things, where if she had been working for the British Broadcasting Corporation, she would have been restricted from being able to either go travel and take part in things at the last minute or build her own app where the IP would have belonged to somebody else and not to her. And so I think she's really shown, we're seeing so many journalists get laid off now. The recent spate of layoffs of the Washington Post, the default has been go to Substack, but she's done so much more than that.
Yeah, we talk about the benefits and the negative parts of Substack, and we also talk about the difference in Silicon Valley's relationship to work and workers versus her experience as a unionized journalist at established media organizations, and the way in which the traditional system provides protection but also constructs a world that has less agency in their work, and the culture of Silicon Valley and how it has shaped the internet that everyone in the world uses today.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's take a listen.
I'm really excited to have Sophia Smith Galer on. She is the author of How to Kill a Language, the creator of the Sophiana app, a sort of traditionally ex-BBC trained journalist who has become a public intellectual and a journalist on social media with a very large following on TikTok and Instagram. So welcome, Sophia.
That's the first time anyone's ever called me a public intellectual. Very nice. I like it.
If you keep publishing these books that dig into important intellectual topics, and that's what you are. It's the public intellectual isn't the institution defining it, it's the practice of doing it. And you broke the story about the deepfake porns about Billie Eilish and the way in which it generated a lot of views, and you've also dug into the way in which anti-vaxxers have gamed these algorithms. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work you've done in studying the distortions on these platforms.
I think it's really interesting how you can think about what it means to game an algorithm, because obviously I, as a storyteller that tries to combine traditional journalism and the rigor, editorial rigor of it with the techniques of content creation, I have to game the algorithm every day in the hope audiences who would be interested in my work may find it. And I want to make a positive social impact on the internet. Not everybody does. And on exactly the same algorithm, they will game it, but in a different way. to make a negative social impact on the internet, possibly because they also have a financial incentive. They want to make money out of people. They may want to scam people, or they may want to make highly polarizing content that they know is likely to perform perhaps better on the algorithm and monetize more quickly. So in a lot of the work that I have done, if I take, for example, one of those early reports that I would have done at Vice about anti-vaxxers, they were deliberately trying to weaponize platforms like TikTok to spread their message more widely. I remember in that particular story, which I believe was the first or second story that I actually ever did at Vice. I did it on my first or second day in the job because it was all over my TikTok feed. But they had very smartly identified that their content would not be flagged with the COVID-19 information marker that TikTok was applying to content at the time if they simply avoided using the word vaccine in the content. So when we talk about these individuals gaming algorithms, realizing, hang on, if I don't put vaccine in, I'm going to avoid the flag. That's not really that sophisticated if you think about it. That's quite easy to do.
Yeah.
So some algorithm gaming is very easy, and that is why bad actors can do well rather quickly without much ammunition or a base level of followers. Certainly when I feel like, what do I do to game the algorithm? I actually feel like I often have to deploy techniques that I've had to work on for a really long time, data that I've had to amass for years on end, constantly watching an ever-changing algorithm. Two people's experiences of gaming the algorithm, I do not think look the same.
Yeah, and you know, you've also talked about that with Andrew Tate and the sort of claiming that platforms don't promote content that has misogyny, and yet they don't tolerate it, and yet you see it all over the place. When I talk to trust and safety people, like Yoel Roth, who ran Trust and Safety at Twitter and now runs it for the Match Group, and a bunch of others, they feel this conflict between transparency and the platforms, where they feel like if they expose all the rules and tell the rules to creators, then only the bad actors will be able to manipulate it. I wonder if you could talk about what it was like, first as a journalist and now as a creator, trying to critique these platforms and their doublespeak about what they allow and what they promote.
What was probably always the most infuriating thing about what I would call platform accountability reporting. So these various stories that I did where ultimately something had been published or amplified on one of these platforms, be it TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, etc., and coming to the platform saying, I've identified this, it appears to violate your own guidelines, quite apart from any other guidelines that may exist in the world, it appeared to violate your own. Why has it been allowed to stay up? In many cases, I can remember that I may have been sent a tip by someone about it, and I would have known in advance that the content would have received reporting flags, because that's almost always one of the first things that they say, like, you are able to report content, like shifting the blame back to the user. You are able to report content. To not totally play devil's advocate, but when you consider the amount of content that these platforms do take down, it's not like they're not taking anything down. When they issue their vaguely transparent transparency reports that they often put out quarterly, it's mind-boggling how much content that they are taking down, that they have been able to stop from even ever being uploaded. That is happening, but it's just not happening at the rate that it should be, and it is often happening under the silicon gaze, the gaze of AI moderation rather than humans who are in jobs where they are well supported to do a really good job. We've seen cuts there for ages. And as a reporter, the most infuriating thing is bringing these moments to the attention of the platform to see if they'll react. Will they take the content down? Will they do anything? And what is their right of reply, which of course they are entitled to deliver. And so many times the right of reply has been really vague, really weak. I will often be given background information that will actually have the meat of the story. So they won't ever really, it's been really rare in their actual right of reply, they will acknowledge that they've taken content down. Often that will be on background. Sometimes they'll do it without even telling me. That's why I always have to keep receipts of what I've identified, because there won't be any paper trail of it other than my journalism. So it's incredibly difficult holding these platforms to account. I had to do it only a couple of weeks ago. I did a story about how on Amazon, someone was selling a biography about me that I'd found that they'd...
Yeah, I want to talk about that. That's fascinating that you found an AI-generated biography of yourself being sold as a physical book.
Yeah, I found that, and by the same author, big quote marks, I found 60 plus other biographies that they had generated and were selling, and they had created and published these biographies in a space of 2 months. 63 or 64 odd biographies in 2 months. They were obviously AI generated. The image on my biography is not me, but it claims to be about Sophia Smith Galer. When I approached Amazon and I said, this biography, which I had bought by that point and had realized that it had misled would-be readers about my faith, said I was, a Muslim woman who regularly spoke about my faith and various things. I've not yet ever been a Muslim woman, and that my app Sophiana did things that it doesn't do. It made up the features and use case of Sophiana. So when I told Amazon that, hey, this biography is lying about me, it wasn't that it was saying anything sort of super defamatory. It was just things that were weird.
It was just hallucinated.
Yeah, it was just hallucinated and wrong. And they very quickly not only took my biography down, but all of the other biographies. Whereas other individuals have not had the same success. And I think I had the success because I approached as a member of the press. And as I approached them, I said, this book actually has published inaccuracies about me, which I suppose if they were risk averse, which big tech often is, they don't want a legal battle that they don't need. So it's easier to just eject the dodgy sale. And I remember that their right of reply seemed quite weak, and they ignored the vast majority of questions that I put to them as an individual. And then when I took the story to BBC Radio 4, we approached them with additional questions for a documentary I made for them, and they still ignored the vast majority of questions we put to them. They don't want to be transparent, even when the press approaches them.
They don't want that kind of accountability. It's fascinating for so many years. One of the things that I have done for journalists and activists and others is provide this back channel to these big tech platforms. So they have this official front door. This is the customer support, the trust and safety team. And they have this flow of an impossibly large number of issues. And so they don't address most of them. And then there is this sort of, old boys network that essentially exists of people who know people. And you can send someone a DM saying, hey, I've got this issue, go look at it. And then all of a sudden it gets at the top of the thing. And journalists have a similar type access that a normal user doesn't, because it's not just a customer support or trust and safety issue. All of a sudden it becomes a press issue and they start paying attention. But if they don't, then they're making money off of those AI slop books, or they're making money off of that, Andrew Tate misogyny content.
Of course they are, because if the content is performing well or selling, then they're making money off that, and in taking it down, that money stops. So yeah.
Yeah. Hey, this is just a quick interruption to ask you to follow revolution.social on your podcast app or YouTube. And if you're following us, please rate, review it, and tell a friend about the show. Thank you very much. You went from being a BBC journalist to Vice to being entirely independent and building out a large audience. And now you've built an app that uses AI, Sophiana, to help other journalists with this process. I wonder if you could talk about the stepping from in front of the camera to behind the camera and sitting down on the computer. And I'm sure you used a lot of different, AI tools and others to help build this and worked with people. But what was it like to do that? And what is the app that you built?
Yeah, so all the way back when I would have been a video journalist at the BBC. We're talking several years ago now. I think I left the BBC in 2021. I became well known for pioneering vertical video journalism, but the majority of that was TikToking that I was doing in my own time. And I campaigned internally without success while I was there to encourage the BBC to make sure that they were putting news and journalism on TikTok, because it was fast growing as a source of news. Lots of other newsrooms were far quicker to catch on, and BBC approached it with great reluctance and resistance, which I don't entirely criticize. I think there were good points made, but ultimately it was a decision that they would come to renege on, because they did end up joining TikTok sometime after I left, citing me as part of the reason why they joined. And in the meantime, before that happened, I'm there thinking, can I have a career here? Because I've been encouraged in everything that I do to make sure that audiences are served with the journalism that I'm doing, that it must center their needs, not rather than what I'm comfortable doing. And vertical video was clearly the next digital stage of this journey of making sure journalism reaches audiences. So I took on a job that did let me do that, encouraged me to do that, which was my senior news reporter job at Vice News here in London. And unsurprisingly, my own personal profile continued to sort of explode, because I was in a role where what I was doing was encouraged. They wanted vertical video innovation, and at Vice News helped to innovate vertical first deployments that we were doing, where journalists who may not have really been on camera that much before, or were only ever used to being filmed by a TV crew, was suddenly delivering really compelling vertical video that was peer-to-peer and going viral and building community on these platforms where newsrooms had been struggling to build trust and relationships. And I got to a point where I had this community around my work and a following interested in what I was doing. Things were not going well at Vice, Spoiler, if you know what happened to Vice, my job, had I not left my job when I did, which was very gratefully on my own terms and at a very exciting point in my life where I knew I was going to work on the book that's now about to be born. But had I not left, I would have been laid off about 6 months later. So I've very much learned the hard way that a permanent role in journalism is never permanent. It's not true. It's never permanent. I've done a lot of training and given a lot of advice and consulting over the years to journalists who want to do what I have done. And a lot of that has inevitably been in person. It's been workshops and consulting. And of course, I still do that. But I knew that I would be able to scale my expertise and hopefully assist a lot more journalists and a lot more experts to do what I've done if I could scale that expertise somehow with a tool. I ended up creating an app that was what a lot of people in the AI innovation space are calling like the digital twin. That's sort of a big buzzword at the moment, particularly in journalism innovation, but thinking about products where a digital twin can do anything from assisting you with your reporting to various stages of the editorial process. And essentially, Sophiana is an iOS app where you can paste an article that you've just written into it. It will turn it into a script far better structured and worded for performing well on an algorithm like TikTok's or Instagram's based on my expertise. And you can film it immediately with a teleprompter. And a tool like that did not exist prior to my doing it. It was one of the first creative journalism tools. And there is no way I would have been able to build that without leaving my staff journalism job or without making all that video independently, because all of that video, all of those transcripts, all of that information that I've accrued, that's all now personal data I own. It's not owned by either of the newsrooms that I worked for. Then to pitch all of these various competitions and opportunities for funding, and the opportunity, as I did eventually win, to go to like Turkey for a week where the International Centre for Journalists hosted a design sprint. The fact that quite last minute I can say yes to something like that and move my life around to go and do it and greatly benefit from it. I just wouldn't be able to do that, would I, if I was a staff journalist? There would be commitments and responsibilities that I couldn't let people down on. So what's thrilling about my current working life is that some of it will be the public facing stuff that you see in the video content that I make, the storytelling that I love to do and will always love to do, amplifying my journalism. But then there's all the stuff that's not public facing, and it's more the consulting and the tool building that I'm trying to do to help people do what I get to do every day.
It's really inspiring to see that, not just pushing your own career forward, but saying that, look, all these other journalists, everyone else, they need to adapt to this new pattern. It's funny. I remember, reading Chomsky and Stuart Hall and all of these media theorists in the 1990s when I was in university, and everyone was talking about the consolidation of the media industry and the way in which it was collapsing. But it was a moment before we had social media, before we had blogging, before we had the internet existed, but there was no business there. And now, decades later, we see that there are all of these creators who are journalists, who are independent, who are able to build things. The thing I think is fascinating about your work is you have spent a huge amount of time writing a book, editing the books. And this, How to Kill a Language isn't your only book, but it's the thing I think is so fascinating is we have this mass audience, which you already have, you have built up. And then you have a book which is very traditionally rooted in what the institutions of society say is important. I wonder if you could talk about the juxtaposition between creating this really heavily edited, heavily focused, produced long-form content of your book, and I know that you're recording the audiobook, you might be done with it already, versus the shortest of short-form videos.
Well, to invite you into the SSG lore, from the very earliest journalism training that I got, I was encouraged to be multi-platform by, I think, very sensible journalism professors who could, even if they didn't always understand the digital revolution as I feel like they could have, they did always really get that if I wanted to be a journalist that could really serve audiences and help my newsroom out, I would need to be able to do TV. I would need to be able to do radio. I would need to be able to write for online. I would need to be multi-skilled, multi-platform. And from a storytelling perspective, I see the through line between the 1.5 minute long explainer and the 95,000 word book, because people are only going to find out I've written a 95,000 word book from the body of explainers and analyses and video content that I've self-commissioned to try and build a relationship with audiences who otherwise would not find out about me. And that's not even the case that Sophia has never been platformed anywhere. I've been platformed across mainstream media. Even mainstream media cannot guarantee engagement and views and awareness raising anymore. There are many times where a really underestimated metric that exists in the world. Obviously, it's not relevant for everyone, but even if you take advantage of page view metrics on Wikipedia, ever since someone made a Wikipedia page about me, I've been able to benefit from this measurement. But I can see firsthand, if I appear on mainstream media, whether it's had an impact. Have people been curious about me and wanted to see my work, learn more about me afterwards? And obviously there are other places I can measure that from, whether it's personal website hits, whether it's follow requests on social media. And I see time and time again that the one thing that guarantees deeper engagement with the longer form work that I do is a high performing vertical video. Like, that is the one way I can guarantee that. It's a far more successful guarantee than any mainstream media appearance. So for me, it's really important way of amplifying my work and building relationships longer term with people.
Many years ago now, I had Al Jazeera English did a 25-minute little documentary about me, and it was lots of fun. And there were budgets, and they followed me around, and they did this video, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. And as far as I can tell, almost no one ever has watched this video. It feels great to me. And then a couple of years ago, the BBC and CNN did this history of Twitter called Breaking the Bird, and it was this fantastic 4-part documentary. And I went on CNN live at, prime time. And I think there were 100,000 viewers of CNN at the time that I was live. And I'm like, this is much smaller than almost any viral video. I'm like, this is this weird thing where it hadn't made that adjustment. Yet, that's how people, the shorter form thing is how people discover the depth.
And here is one caveat that I would add to this. What is incredibly annoying with platforms is I've obviously spent all of these years building up a following, but follow numbers don't really mean anything anymore. So what means more to me day to day, I would actually say here that Instagram platforms a lot more, or places a lot more of my work in front of my existing followers than TikTok does. YouTube, I'm still quite new to YouTube. I've only really been on there 2.5 months. So I'm still learning how the algorithm works. But I can tell it doesn't always place me in front of subscribers either. I have to rely on these algorithm gaming techniques to try and support my video to go viral each time, because I can't ever guarantee it's going to reach the people who have previously clicked, yes, follow. I do want to see Sophia again, please. Bring her back to me, algorithm. And then it doesn't bring me back to them. And then it's even more depressing that you have platforms like Substack, which promise to be newsletter platforms, and then they start, as far as I understand it, I'm not totally on top of it, but as far as I understand it, you can now start following someone or subscribing to a newsletter from the app, in which case I, the subscription, the newsletter owner, no longer receive their email address, or actually portable data, that is.
Or the payment stuff. So, Substack was premised on this right to exit. Like, the idea was that creators could come in, they could have their newsletter, and if you didn't like what Substack was doing, you could leave. And they let you set up your payments with Stripe, so it was your own payment things. You had the emails and everything else. And then they discovered that if they constructed a moat around cross-promotion of these things, and they made a way in which people could connect directly, and then they built an app, and they started doing podcasts and videos and microblogging and all those other things like that, that then locks you in. And if you're subscribed to Substack and you pay via Apple Pay or Google Pay, these are, the platforms that are encouraging this, then what happens is that you can't leave. Like, if you were to leave to, Beehive or Ghost out of Substack, you lose those subscribers, you lose those paying customers.
So there's me, an author who hopes that people will read my book and buy my book. I make a lot of content for free, but it's in the hope that a purchasing decision will come out of it at the end. I'm here trying to make content in the hope that at the end of it, at some point, somewhere in the funnel or relationship, they're going to buy the book. It is pretty exhausting. I find it quite energizing at the same time because of the work that I do, which has principally been pioneering vertical video. So obviously I do find it enjoyable, but I can really easily also understand how challenging it is for everyone. Lots of us who would prefer to just stick to writing long form and not having to sort of schlep and make loads of vertical video when the platform can't even guarantee much in return for it. It's a lot of labor where there's no return. I actually have just remembered Instagram ringing me earlier this year because they were calling up creators. It was really weird. They were calling people up. I had a phone call because they have a call center in Dublin. So a very nice lady with a very nice Irish accent rings me to ask me about how I'm finding Instagram and talking to me about my content. And she basically reviewed my content. This woman who respectfully knows sweet FA about making content. And she starts saying to me, you've seen the numbers and the views that I get. I'm not doing badly. And she basically pointed out I could be doing better. And I could be doing better by posting more. To which I responded, well, on TikTok and on YouTube, I actually get revenue share for making all of this content. Yeah, as a Brit making reels, I don't get anything. So I said, why should I make more content when you're not paying me to do it? And she really quickly, almost as if it were a practiced line, she said, look at Instagram as your business card. So I should be making more content for the platform just relentlessly, even more content than I'm already making.
Do it for the exposure.
Do it for the exposure. Yes, that's the translation of what she said. Mad.
It's fascinating because I think most users assume that creators on these platforms are getting a percentage of the ad revenue around their content. Like, you are there to view the content. You're there to see what the creators have to say, people you want to connect to, have stories that you want to hear about, and that you sort through these ads that keep you from seeing it. And the trade-off you're doing is like, well, I'll do the ads, I'll look at the ads, to buy the clothes or whatever it is they're trying to sell you in exchange for it. But what has blown me away is understanding how today so little of the revenue, the business of being a creator, comes from that. So long form YouTube, you're doing stuff, and you're really big on TikTok. So maybe you're getting some revenue from there, but the meta platforms aren't giving back to these creators at all, even though they're making, hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
And there's a big problem with that. It's interesting in these two industries that I occupy, journalism and content creation. I come from one that is really heavily unionized, that is full of standards and like editorial guidelines that are bigger than the Bible. And then I'm part of this other industry that's just like, whew, there is nothing, just tumbleweeds and total chaos. And I think the good side is that it just allows for this wild, abandoned like creativity. That's the good side. The bad side is that we're not like guaranteed any protections, really. And it even comes to, like you said, that is how you would make money if you were drawing revenue from revenue share from platforms. But if you were even making money, so I make far more money from my brand partnerships than I would from revenue share. But all of these other considerations have to come in with brand partnerships, including, do I align with them? I am not going to do a brand partnership with anything that could endanger the independent journalism that I do, or endanger, misalign with values that I hold, that my audiences hold. But when they decide what to pay me, or what they think is an acceptable fee to pay for videos on this platform or that platform for this length or whatever, there's no rule book. So that could mean I'm paid like...
Well, there is a rule book. They're just, you don't get any access to it.
No.
I mean, it's so funny because I was born in Berkeley. Like, I grew up in Northern California. Like, there is like the weirdest thing for me is the culture of these tech companies, the culture of Silicon Valley, the culture of what everybody else in the world is having to contend with is, ironically enough, my own culture. Like, it is the thing that is most native to where I'm coming from. This sort of out of the 1960s convergence of technology and university and counterculture and the new left. And all of its contradictions have been then imposed on the rest of the world. So this sort of weird combination of worker ownership, because in Silicon Valley, everyone gets stock options, and anti-union, like vehement anti-union attitudes that like, you are a partner, we are building a new world together, this is a utopianism, everything else. And under no condition are we going to give our creators real rights.
When you illustrate it like that, I've never heard it described in that way before, but it's so, the inequality of it is really clear, isn't it?
People talk about Burning Man a lot, but I think Burning Man is a very effective metaphor to understand what social media has done to the world, because officially at Burning Man, there's no money. It's a gifting economy. It's an egalitarian space that you're coming together and you're doing psychedelics and you're making crazy art, and it's this rough place and it's difficult. So you are going through adversity and you connect. And yet everybody is coming with massive levels of wealth inequality, massive levels of social inequality. And there's all these cliques and power dynamics that are going on that no one on the surface wants to acknowledge exist. And like, that is the culture, that is the model that social media is itself based on. I mean, I literally went to Burning Man the first time 6 months before we launched Twitter. It's both powerful in this weird way of like, it is a resetting of the world, but it is also so flawed and doesn't take into account how do people support themselves? How do we build livings? Or what is diversity? So I want to get back to your book, which is like, how do languages die? And what are we doing to it? And then in the era of the internet, in the era of connecting to people, what happens to it? So tell me about how to kill a language.
So my entry point into being curious about the world's language diversity was the language diversity I saw at home. So I grew up in a half English, half Italian family, and every day my mum would ring my nonna and, ask how she was. And every weekend, every other weekend, I'd see my nonna. And that was this rich linguistic landscape that I was sort of half in, half out of, because I could sort of understand what was being told to me, but I couldn't speak any of it. And I grew up thinking, I can't speak Italian. I should speak Italian. I am Italian, but I can't speak Italian. And I don't know how much of that perhaps motivated me to sort of learn other languages which were less complicated, in that I had no emotional tie to them or sort of slightly disjointed relationship with Italian. So I went on to study Spanish and Arabic. And as in my late 20s, I got curious about like the language that got away. That's how I felt about Italian. And as I got better at Italian, I increasingly realized that Mum and Nonna weren't speaking Italian. They were speaking what they call dialect, and it really is a language that is different to Italian, that, like Italian, grew up out of Vulgar Latin into one of the many Romance languages that you can find in all of Western Europe. In my curiosity to learn more about it, I saw that it's on an endangered list and probably won't see the 22nd century. So it led me on this journey, being very curious about how is it that languages are lost in diaspora by migrant populations, but how is it also that languages are endangered in sort of their natural habitat, as it were, where the languages are from. And I was able to travel around the world. I actually physically went to most of the language locations that I talk about in the book, and I chart 10 different ways in which languages are disappearing. So I don't only look at languages with very few speakers left. I absolutely look at them, but I also look at what's happened with Ukrainian in Russian occupied areas during this current war. I will look at the linguicide that has happened to Kurdish, which has many, many speakers, but would certainly have far more if states such as Turkey had not criminalized it over the course of its history.
It's amazing how some states criminalize languages. I live in Aotearoa, New Zealand now, and for generations, Te Reo Maori was criminalized until the state changed its mind due to lots of Maori activism and decided that Te Reo Maori should be integral to the identity of a New Zealander. And now it's very controversial about things. Now you can't read a government document in New Zealand without it being maybe 10% Te Reo. When I enrolled my kids into school in New Zealand, I'm like, I don't understand what the letters home mean. Like, I don't understand the government communication, because all of the words around education and family and youth and connection and culture and everything else, they had found Te Reo Maori words to put in there because it was creating this identity.
And have you since learned those words?
Yeah, and now there's linguistic studies that show that Kiwis who claim they speak no Te Reo can accurately define, can accurately figure out what is valid Te Reo grammar and pronunciation, even if they don't know the words, because you hear it so much that you can say, oh, well, this is a Polynesian word that is not Te Reo versus one that is Te Reo, even when people who, because there's a backlash, a pro-colonial backlash against this, even those people have a really deep understanding of what Te Reo is, because it is everywhere, and because it's been an intentional decolonial process or post-colonial process of constructing the language. And it's really inspiring.
It's so inspiring that the language revitalization and reclamation that has happened with Te Reo Maori worldwide in a lot of language activist spaces. The most famous thing would be the language nests, or kahanga reo, that are most famously associated with Maori speakers and who have been able to create new generations of speakers, that is what every community with dwindling speakers envies, the creation of children who can speak this language. The one way to revitalize a language is to get the children speaking it, because a classic sign of a language disappearing is when only the oldest generations can still speak it, which would be the case for the particular variety of the language sort of continuum known as Emilian, which my nonna would have spoken and which my mum can still speak. But you said that you're from Berkeley, and California is one of the language diversity hotspots of the world.
Well, that's what I was going to talk about. In researching your book and everything else, I realized that you actually came and visited the part of very rural Northern California where I grew up, where the Karuk people are. And I'm not Indigenous, but I grew up in a part of California that has a relatively high population of Indigenous people. And I know a number of people who are Karuk or grew up on the Karuk reservation. And it is a language that has, I believe, like you probably know, but like 5 native speakers or something. But it's very small.
It's very small. I was very fortunate for the book to interview an elder who I think would be one of the most fluent speakers remaining, who could tell many stories about his childhood and memories with the language that are now long past. His name's Julian Lang, and he's remarkable for helping to create the Master Apprentice program, which, a little like the language nests that I just described in Aotearoa, New Zealand, they've become so successful that loads of speakers of other languages desperately in need of support are doing this program. So the Master Apprentice program is this incredible program with a kind of list of rules that you sort of ideally would abide by. And it is for elders and confident speakers of a language to take a novice under their wing and give them a certain amount of hours in a given year and create another speaker with the amount of time and conversation that they are able to have with this individual. It's quite similar to sort of an immersion program that language learners may be familiar with. But the thing that blew my mind the most about it is that certainly with what he's doing in California, you receive $15 an hour for doing it. So that actually, even it doesn't have to be that much money, but even just some money can help protect that time and make sure that in the middle of busy working lives, cost of living crises, etc., that these connections can still be made. Because you can say, oh, it's a tight year actually, but I'll do it next year. I'll do it next year. I'll do it next year. Your speaker community may not have till next year or the year after. The speakers who can become the masters in the Master Apprentice program won't be here forever. We have to do it now. So that was in every chapter. Unfortunately, there is a sad story of a language disappearing. My argument is that the language has been disappeared by external forces, and that's what the whole book is about, looking at responsibility that dominant powers should have taken for the world's language diversity. But I always wanted each chapter to have a solution. So his is the MAP program, and I would really recommend anyone listening who thinks, gosh, that sounds interesting, find out if a program like it is happening where you live. And if it doesn't happen where you live, could you be the person who helps spread the word about it and get a similar program where you are to help revive a language near you?
Can you talk about the way in which when you speak a language, you become in some ways a different person, and you bring a different personality to it, you bring the cultural stuff to it, and the way in which we take that to social media. So, I find the worlds of social media between languages to be fascinatingly different and sort of isolated. Most of my social media content is in English or Portuguese or Spanish, which are the languages I speak, but you speak Arabic and Spanish and English. What is the difference between those and the way in which those communities create different norms and different people and different cultures?
It's really easy and understandable to feel like we have different personalities in the languages that we speak. And it's...
Maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's not. But if you think about it for a moment, has this language suddenly granted you a new personality, or has it unlocked something that was always within your powers, within your capacity? And when we learn languages do have very distinctive ways of expression. Many of the modes of expression will draw from the cultures where those languages grew up. And if you become a confident, proficient speaker, it's very likely you've done that by speaking to loads of people from that place. You have spoken to a lot of people.
You acculturate yourself.
You acculturate. You pick up phrases that they say a lot. I think that I swear more in Spanish and I mention God a lot more in Arabic than I do in English. In Italian, it was doing an episode of my podcast Word for Word where I realized for the first time, oh my goodness, I say terms of endearment way more in Italian than I do in English, because Italian speakers always call me nice things. It's Italian. And because it's the language of my childhood, you know how you speak to children, you're often called these affectionate terms of endearment. And naturally, that's how I am now processing Italian. And that's the beauty of how languages unlock these elements that we may not perform in our mother tongue, because we associate different ideas and modes of expression with what we talk about in our mother tongue. Then again, lots of research into how we think is identifying that there are things that we may feel more confident or able to do across our language portfolio. So in therapy, a lot of therapists, backed by evidence, may want to engage with you about particular issues in your second language, not your first, because it's been demonstrated that we can sometimes distance ourselves a little bit better from highly emotive episodes in our life if we talk about it in a second language. Now, obviously, you can only do that if you speak that second language very well. Otherwise, you're probably not going to describe it too sophisticatedly.
You're doing all the translation in your head and you're not being able to actually address the emotions.
How cool that we can speak multiple languages and use all of these incredible tools. And what happens when you start not prizing or even thinking about the language diversity around you is what happens is multilingualism, I believe, is hurt by that. You'll get a lot more people thinking that they can get by monolingual, and they will get by monolingually in a dominant language that's probably English. What do they lose when that happens? We are incentivized to learn English around the world. Yeah, I'm speaking particularly obviously of places where, not like the UK, where we speak it because it's here. But I'm thinking of places where you're incentivized to learn it because it's associated with progress and opportunity. And of course, you have the right to access that. But should it come at the expense of a language that ties you to your mum, the language that ties you to your family, the language that ties you to cultural memory, the place that you're from, all of the knowledge and intangible cultural heritage associated with that? And in my book, what I chart really is what people feel like they lose when they lose that link. And on a personal level, it's quite disastrous and upsetting. But on a wider community level, it can affect everything, like you not being able to translate for your grandparent when they're in hospital. It can translate to your country making less money because, or individuals in the country making less money because they can't access international opportunities where they'd earn more if they were more multilingual or spoke particular languages. When I began it, it seemed like a Herculean task to attempt to quantify and qualify why is it so bad when we lose a language. And I hope at the end of reading my book, you feel like, oh my goodness, what is going to be lost? What a disaster that's going to be. Is there anything we can do about it in the meantime?
Well, thank you so much. I encourage everyone to read the book. Also, you recorded your own audiobook, so I'm looking forward to that. And I just am so grateful for the time and the attention and the work you do. Thank you so much.
I had a really good chat. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Sophia Smith Galer for coming on revolution.social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan, from Flock Marketing.
Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share this episode if you love it. To sign up for our email newsletter, visit revolution.social.
And for more interviews like this one, follow revolution.social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nosta's Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas' Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.